Okay, it's 7:30, time to start. As those of you who came to the first session know, this is not any kind of a formal talk. As I purposely called it Musings and Lessons, it kind of gives me the permission to say whatever I feel like saying. And so I think we advertised it that the presentation would be about 40 minutes or so, and then I called the next section Dialogue. I did invite a few people because this section of my life is on the seminary years, which stretches a long time, 12 years, all the way from 8th grade up until the day that I was ordained. So the people that I was in school with that are here tonight, they look to be about the same age as me because they are. And calling them, I will have people like this at every session. They will be called fact checkers. So some of them that are here I will acknowledge and invite to say something afterwards, some I will not. And just a reminder from the first session too, this is not a tell-all. There is going to be no dirt on anyone. And I realized when I was going through this, started writing these last summer, that there's more that I can't say than I can, which I presume is true for all of our lives. But it's going to be some things that just came to my mind. We'll begin, even though it's not a formal talk. Let's pray the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. So the presentation is going to be in 3 parts because I was in the seminary for 12 years, 3 sections of 4 years each. The first was high school. So I'll begin with where I ended the last session, was on childhood, 0 to age 13. How a man gets to the seminary, we call that a call story. My call story was very undramatic. Some of the men have very dramatic stories. There was no grand appearance. It was like back in the day, this was in October of 1962. They were preparing for the Second Vatican Council. There was an 8-day octave of prayer. I loved serving. I was there with the priest. And the priest said, we got along fine with the priest. The priests were guests at our house. One of them asked me, he said, well, where are you going to go to high school? I said, well, I'm thinking about going to St. Louis University High School because I hear they're big on studying, and I actually kind of like studying. But then he said, did you ever think about going to the seminary high school? I said, no. He said, well, why don't you think about it? So I did, and I went, and 12 years later, I was a priest. So I'm going to fill in a few spots in between, but it was as simple as that. I grew up in our parish was on the boundary between Walnut Park and Jennings. When we started high school, it was called St. Louis Preparatory Seminary, or the Prep. So I remember you had to go back in those days, you had to take a placement test to get into the school. And so you had to drive to the school. I had never been there. And people like me who grew up north, I was not very often go south of Forest Park. And so we got lost. I remember we ended up in Resurrection Cemetery, which is right next to the seminary, looking for it. We eventually found there. I remember when we started our freshman year of high school, there were 175 boys. We were put in 5 groups. The blackbirds and bluebirds and all that kind of stuff. It was called 9A, B, C, D, E. And there were, I still remember the first day we sat down there, the head priest in the seminary said, well, boys, I hate to tell you this, but 12 years from now, when you finish, there's only going to be 10% of you make it. Well, he was optimistic. Out of that group, only 7 went straight through. So it was 4%. So a few others were ordained from that group. One of them is here tonight, the one over there wearing the collar. So that's how it got started. I loved it, but one thing that they were big on at that school was demerits. And one of my classmates that I'm very jealous of never got any demerits all the way through. I did not fit in that camp. You could get a demerit for almost nothing. You could get a demerit for coming late to school in the morning. And where I live, this is going to sound like one of those 5 miles uphill in the snow both ways stories, but true enough, got on a bus at 6:15 in the morning, and those of you who know North County, we started out in the Jennings area. We went all the way up to Spanish Lake, came back down through the city. The last stop was it was on Filer, somewhere around there in South St. Louis. So we got to class late, even on an hour and 45-minute bus ride. Father says, "I'm going to see your demerit card." I said, "Father, the bus is late." He said, "It's not my problem, tell your parents." So that's kind of the way that it was. And you had to memorize prayers in Latin. We mostly knew some Latin because we served Mass, but memorizing them and writing them down was a different thing. And so you could get demerit if you did wrong on your prayers. And so anyway, that was part of our life there. I had some absolutely wonderful teachers there, absolutely wonderful teachers. In fact, I would say a lot of the fact that school was not so hard for me the rest of the time after that was because we had really good teachers there who taught us good study habits and discipline, and so it was a good thing. And back in those days, it was a different world. I'm talking about 62 years ago, 1963, when I started high school. So very often I stayed after school, so the bus left right after school. If you missed that, you just found your own way home. You could still hitchhike home in those days. That was one of the ways, or get a ride from somebody else. It was a pretty good deal for me since I was the youngest in the class. I was the last to drive, and so everybody drove before I did. So there were always somebody else willing to give me a ride home if it came to that. I loved playing sports, but I was not one of the better players. I played them enough to enjoy it, but I remember trying out for the basketball team senior year. Well, I was the last boy cut, so remember that didn't feel very good. That was a life lesson right there. It's like, well, you just deal with it. You try things, and some things work out, and some things don't. He said, well, you could make the team, but he said you wouldn't play. You would sit on the bench the whole time, because there were younger boys who would play. I said, okay. So that was so I found other things to do. There were plenty of intramurals there, which were enjoyable. One story I'll tell you, back in those days, a lot of the teachers there were young too, and some of them were some pretty good athletes. One of them, one of the PE coaches there, he had set the high school record for scoring at Mercy High School. Another one of them was a Missouri State weightlifting champion. So we had quite a variety there, and some of them they were young enough men to be competitive, very competitive. And they were on the same teams with the students. So imagine what it was like if you were, and the students refereed the games. Imagine what it was like, and some students who were refereeing were afraid to call fouls on them. And so I didn't take to that too well. And so I remember myself and one of my friends, this is Marshall, we decided, we came up with a plan that we were going to volunteer to referee the same game in which all three of these guys were out there playing. And I tell you what, they all fouled out in the first half. So now that resulted in charges of bad judgment against me. But some things are just worth it. Gene and I have remained good friends over all those years, and that was one of our prouder moments in high school. It didn't really change their behavior, but it made us feel better for a day. And one of my, besides that friend, who was a very close friend, we both loved math, and so we loved a lot of things together. We loved enjoying life together. He also had his aunt loaned him a Carmen Ghia. Some of you maybe don't know what a Carmen Ghia is. It was a sports version of a Volkswagen. And remember all those stories you hear about how many kids can you fit into a Volkswagen? I can give you some firsthand evidence that you can get a lot of kids into a Volkswagen, and that they can be moved without turning them on. So there was a lot of good times. And another one of my closer friends was from South St. Louis. And my mom said, well, why can't you have more friends from north? And he lived right by the seminary. But what we shared in common was water skiing. We both loved to water ski, and he's one of the first people I water skied with, besides one of the priests at our parish who would take us water skiing. But he was just the opposite of me. He was as neat as I am sloppy. He always had his hair combed nice. He kept it short. So my mom even told me one time she wanted me to be more like him. I said, Mom, sorry, that's not me. So, but we've remained good friends to this day. He's a priest now. He's retired, and he's the same as he was then. He's neat, he's clean, he's quiet. So I make up for some of those qualities to balance out humanity. I was involved in a lot of activities there, in the student council, in the newspaper. Those of you who are from our parish, this won't surprise you. I didn't do very well in music class, so it was just not one of my things. I will say, as women are especially fond of saying that the male brain isn't fully matured till the mid-20s. Well, I think for me that was a little bit of optimistic saying. Some of us take a little longer time and I still remember, I would say I had a little bit of an attitude. My willingness to foul out those teachers from the game was an example of it. And I really had an attitude with my dad. I really viewed that God put me on this planet to point out all the errors of my dad's opinions on things. And so I still remember at the dinner table, my dad had this sign over his head at the dinner table, God bless our home. And I can picture myself still trying to convince my father of all the things that he believed that weren't just right. And my brothers were looking at me like, give it up. This is not going to work. And they were correct. Took me a long time. We gave him one time, me and my 4 brothers. Imagine what that was like for my parents, having 5 teenage boys in the house at one time. So when I was 18, we had 16, 14, 12, and 10. And so we gave my dad a picture which we thought was very funny. It was a picture of an orangutan with he was leaning on his fist like this. And it said, because this is what we thought about him, just when I learned all life's answers, they changed all the questions. And so now that I'm at my age, that's the way I feel about society a little bit. They're learning some answers, but the questions aren't the same as they used to be. So I would say I was a slow learner about the wisdom of my dad, but he didn't give up on me. And so I was very blessed that he lived till he was 89, and we became just so close in my adult years. I learned also when I was at the beginning part of that seminary, I loved playing sports, as I said. I learned that all adults were not created equal. I still remember playing sports a lot and thinking, man, some of these coaches were mean people, the way that they would yell at the kids. And you know how like sometimes your opinion changes when you get older, like the opinion of my dad? Well, some of these coaches that I thought were mean people, when I got to be an adult, I learned that they really were. That there are such people out there like that. And so, and on the opposite side, I learned some of the people who were dear friends of my parents that just seemed to be the most wonderful people and involved in the parish and very giving people. They certainly were. So it's called this Musings and Lessons. One of the lessons is the one that's often attributed to St. Francis. It is in giving that we receive. It certainly was true in terms of studies. It was true in terms of habits. It was true in terms of knowledge. It was true in terms of friend outreach. It was true in terms of activities. One of the activities that we were invited to do when we were in high school was to go visit orphan boys, they called them, over on St. Joseph's Home for Boys over on South Grand Avenue. And so we were given opportunities, and it was the same thing there, that we had a chance to help them, but we received a lot in return. So, and then going back to that experience about challenging the coaches and the teachers on the basketball court, they thought maybe I was under a little bit of stress, and that maybe I was a little overextended in what I was trying to do. And maybe I was. I was trying to do a lot of things at one time. But it's because of that, I would say a lesson I learned from that is that it's not bad. If you're going to be stretched to your limits, better to do it at that age than if the first time you experience any stress is when you're an adult and have a lot of responsibilities. The price you pay can be a lot higher. So it was just, the high school experience overall was beautiful. That's why I called it, referred to this section as having to do with friends, because I made many lifelong friends, some of whom are here tonight. The next 4-year stretch was college. For me, it was exciting because for the first time in my life, my younger brothers weren't around. Not that I didn't like them, but it was pretty nice to be with all boys my age. And so starting, and it was called a dorm. It's what today you would call a barracks. It was long rows of beds, and just what I remember about that, the reason I say it was fun, there was only one person to watch all of us, and there were about 40 or 50 in a room. Well, just use your imagination. Most everybody here, except for the children, were 18 at one time. So imagine a room full of 40, and this was not exactly a boot camp. Let's just say you could have some fun there. Also, as I indicated from high school, I always did enjoy studying. I enjoyed learning, and I remember that I liked it enough. I had enough hours to graduate after 3 years, but I asked them, could I start on a master's degree program, and they said no. So I found other ways to use my time. Since I love studying, I just studied things that I wanted to study, and that worked out pretty good. I did a lot of reading on my own, and also I got involved in other activities, like one of my classmates and me, we planted 1,000 pine seedlings there. Some of them are still there. I went out and checked it out recently, so those seedlings would be over 50 years old, and they're some pretty tall pine trees now. We made a star for the tower there, and we learned a lesson, talking about lessons. The tower at the seminary, it's still where the seminary is today, where we were in college, we made it almost as wide as that tower. And we figured out a way to hoist it up there. And we thought, oh, most stars are either red or white. And so we wanted to do something different. So we made a blue star, and we hoisted it up there. And then we were so proud of ourselves to get that up there. And we went and drove away from a distance where you could see the tower. We didn't realize that you really can't see blue light very far away. And so we went back to the store where we bought all these blue lights, and we turned them in for red lights. And so that was, and then the star was very visible. But then I remember the priest who was in charge of the seminary, he got a complaint call because think about this. This is 1970, the Christmas of 1970, our senior year. And during the middle of the Vietnam War, we were accused of turning the seminary into a communist enclave. So that was really nothing on our mind. Another one of the places I spent my time there, we had a bookstore there. And that was a lot of fun also. I had most of the other students who worked in the bookstore were older than me, and they all became good friends. I had never had a big brother. Some of them became like big brothers. And they had some funny names. One of them was called Mac, one of them was called Mole, one was called Boater, one was called Dong. The one we had two there with the same last name. One was called Tick, one was called Tok. So they had, it did have a little bit of a fraternity aspect to that extent. We made the rules. We ran the bookstore, we made the rules. We made it to favor the students. We charged more for the books, which we knew most likely somebody else was paying for. And so what we did then is we used the profits from the books to sell very inexpensive soft drinks and ice cream. So the students, we could actually sell them for less than we bought them for because we made enough profit on everything else. So that was an example of the kind of things that we did. And then we also did called apostolic work projects. We would go out and help people. One of the big things was to help back in those days. They were called mentally retarded. Probably the more correct term being used nowadays is those who have intellectual developmental disorder. But that was a wonderful part of our lives there. To weekly visits there, to where they lived, up there in North St. Louis County off Bella Fountain Road, and we would take those kids camping in the summertime, and it was a great adventure, and we had a lot of fellowship doing it. Another side benefit of doing that was that we would go up there in groups, and we were out of an evening doing that, and on the way home we would stop by the home of one of us where we grew up, and the moms competed with one another about who could serve the best dinner. And so that was a byproduct of that. Another program that we started during our college years was called the Leadership Enrichment Program. It was a program to try to work with poor inner city boys to develop their leadership abilities. And so that we were trying to help them. Many of them couldn't get in to very good high schools, and so we worked with them to try to improve their lot in life, to give them a better chance at getting into a better school by the things that we were doing with them to help them expand their range of activities. One of the things that we did there, we were going to give out, because a lot of these kids came from some pretty tough environments, and so we were promoting them to nonviolence, peaceful ways of getting along with one another. And I remember, and actually back in those days, we actually drove the buses ourselves to pick up these kids. And we would go all through North St. Louis picking them up. We would pick them up, run the program, bring them home. And one week we thought this would be really cool. We were going to, positive reinforcement. We were going to give out an award to the kid who did the best at promoting community. And so we called it the LEP Nobel Peace Prize. Well, the day we were going to give it out, on the way to the program, a fight broke out on the bus. So that was one of life's lessons that it's good to have high standards and noble goals, but life doesn't always go the way that you're hoping that it does. Another thing I remember, speaking of the friendships we developed all the way through school, through seminary, was it was tough when one of the men, we call it when he left. We call that discerning out. When he decided he wasn't really called to be a priest, and he would leave. And because we were a very tight group, when someone would leave, it was painful even sometimes. People would start blaming themselves. What did you do wrong to make that person leave? And so it was but that was a sign of just how close we were. One of our classmates that I've remained very close to is currently the Archbishop of Kansas City in Kansas. And I remember one time we were together recently, and it was some of his seminarians from his diocese and me, and I forget where we were, some random place. And I still remember what he told. This is when I was still the seminary president rector. And he told these students, he said, well, one thing I want to tell you about your rector, he had fun when he was in college. And so that would be a true statement. And so it was why not? You're going to be there, and so just do it. The era in which we were in college, 1967 to 1971. Think about what was going on in the world at that time. That was right after the time of the major assassinations of a president, of a presidential candidate, of Dr. King. There was controversy over the Vietnam War. And not too many years after that, a president was going to be impeached. So there were all kinds of different things going on in the world, and that was our formative years. One thing, not all of my contemporaries agree with me on this, but I think there was an element of self-righteousness among our group. We were going to save the world from all these disasters. Probably not too unusual among any group of young teenagers or adults, but I think we kind of had a special dose of that, that we were going to just make all these things right. You'll notice so far I've been talking about 10 minutes just in this section about college. One thing I didn't mention too much was prayer and study. But it did go on there at the seminary. It's just not my first memories. One of my memories, one of my clear, I would say we were in transition times in the church too. The times when we grew up, a lot of the way things had been done for years, the most visible thing was the way Mass was said in Latin facing the wall. That was it was one of the more obvious changes that's still talked about. But the prayer books that had been used for centuries weren't being used anymore. So we were being raised in an era of experimentation, an era of transition, and so we're the products of that. My classmates know well this next story I'm going to say. In music class, there was a 4-part harmony class, and I was one of the boys that was, SATB, the usual thing for a singing class. Well, I was told to sit in row 5, and me and some of the other boys, you just sit in row 5, and as long as you just don't sing anything too loudly to disturb the other boys, you'll be just fine. So you can see the wounds I still have from this. Over 50 years later, you just don't forget things like that. It's kind of like the art teacher I had in grade school that came by and saw me drawing a picture of which I was very proud. And she leans over to me and she says, "Teddy, are you colorblind?" So, these are some of life's experiences that we have, and we get lessons about how to make it through life. And one of the beautiful things that I did, again with the same classmate who's the Archbishop in Kansas City, he and I did a lot of things together. We had a different set of things in common than some of my other friends. But one of the things we did one summer, we knew this was going to be, if we were priests, this was going to be the last summer that we weren't going to be like working directly for the church. So this is the summer of 1970, after our junior year of college, going into senior year. We thought after this we're going to be doing other things. So we just looked at the map and decided where do we want to go. Well, in the midst of all this activity, political activity of this time and social unrest, Boston was kind of a center of it. And neither of us had ever been to the Northeast. So we looked at the map and we picked Boston and away we went. And that was pre-computer days, so I think we sent out 30 or 40 letters. And he said, 2 seminary boys willing to work for our room and board. And so, because we wanted the adventure of going up there. Well, we did. It was a great, they could do a whole lecture just on that. I'm really glad we did that. We got to know another part of the country, but even more fundamentally, just working in that place. There was the category of boys who were there was called emotionally disturbed. They basically were kids who had not been loved. They went all the way. There was a wide range of kids there. It wasn't actually in Boston. It was on the South Bay, on the seashore, a little town called Scituate, about halfway between Boston and Plymouth. But close enough you could take day trips to Cape Cod. And the But the kids there, they ranged from street kids who really had no one who cared about them, to kids who had been locked in basements for 10 years, to spoiled rich kids who all turned out the same way. If they turned out the same way in the sense that if they were never loved, they couldn't love. So that was probably one of the more fundamental lessons. It's actually one of my favorite scriptures. I quoted it last time too in St. John, where in the letter of St. John, where he says, love consists in this, not so much that we love, but that we are loved. The point is, we can't love unless we're loved first. I had, and so did my friend Joe, we had the security of that in the homes in which we were raised. We had the security of that with the good friends we had from school. But boy, what a contrast to work with kids like that. And to this day, I'd say I've worked with all kinds of people with all kinds of mental illness and all kinds of other issues. I don't know that there's one more painful one or difficult one to deal with than if someone just hasn't been loved. And so to replace that and give people skills to grow out of that is a big deal. So the last story I have about college is graduation night. I still remember to this day we had a party out in the courtyard of the college campus, and my parents came, of course, and I still remember my mom was in tears. You'd think maybe tears of happiness, but you know why she was in tears? She said, "You have the longest hair of all the boys in the class." So, good, Mom. I think that was a correct statement. But this is probably difficult for my parishioners to even believe that I could even have that long a hair. But it was the 70s style, and so that was just the way that it was. So that was but I do remember another memory from that graduation night besides my mom being there was, God rest her soul, that she was, I remember when the evening was over, I was so ready to go on to the next chapter of the seminary, so ready. Especially that senior year where I didn't really get to advance my studies very much, but I had a lot of wonderful life experiences. And so, yeah, one of them, another one, a couple of the guys who are here today, we created this bike race called the Glennon 150. It was a third of a mile around the seminary. And so if you went around it 150 times, it was 50 miles. And we had never trained, and I know it's not really a great thing to be a storyteller and then to be the hero of all of one's stories, but I haven't been the hero of all these. But this one here, the part that I remember was in getting into this race. Some of the younger students who were way more fit than we were and worked out really hard for this race and got what they thought was this really fancy 10-speed bicycle. What they didn't know, we had a secret weapon. I had a cousin who actually was a bike racer, and we went and got his bike. So it wasn't an easy bike to ride, but it was by far the best bike to use. And so there were three teammates. You could take turns riding the bike. And one of my teammates was helpful, one was not. But despite him, we won the race. And I still remember the night before the race, these younger guys, they went and just slept, and they had worked out, they relaxed, and they were skinny, and they all got cramps. Well, we didn't get cramps, and we won the race. So that was another one of my adventures. Okay, on to the last chapter. The final 4 years before I was a priest, studying theology. When we started studying theology, that would have been in the fall of 1971, I was so excited. I was so ready to begin studying theology. I didn't have the appreciation for philosophy that I do today, which we had studied during college, but it really felt like priesthood was in sight. After these 8 years, 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, it's like, wow. It was pretty easier to count down 4 years than it was 12 years. So I will have to say, though, I still wasn't 100% in for sure I was going to be a priest. The rule in those days was you could paint your room, whatever color you wanted, and they would give you the paint. But I was so unsure I was going to stay that I didn't paint my room the first semester I was there. But after I was there one semester, I decided to paint my room. And that was kind of a commitment that I thought I might stay, and I ended up staying in that room. And 4 years later, I did become a priest. It took me a while to get to, I just kind of did it one semester at a time, and that's another life lesson. It's the only way, it's like that old bromide, way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. It's the only way you can do school. One semester at a time, one day at a time, one class at a time, and it is a life lesson. It's the way all of life is. You have your long-range goals, but the question is, what are you going to do next? So again, we also had some wonderful professors there who really were dedicated to teaching us and moving us along, and so again, I'm not going to mention specific names. There were so many. There actually the Vincentian priests were the main priests that staffed the seminary, and a good number of them. And there also were some lay people there that taught us, and also we were allowed to take courses at St. Lucia University from some of the Jesuit priests, and some of them I became very dear friends of. So one of my life lessons, I guess you could say, is, again, I'm not sure my contemporaries agree with this, but I think we're all a lot more products of our time than we like to own up to be. Don't we all like to think of ourselves as just we became this way because it's a way we decided to be and we made ourselves this way? Well, maybe, but it's not like I was the only person who had long hair. It's not like I was the only person who had bell-bottom pants. It's not like I was the only person who was listening to now what we call classic rock. I was not the only person who had triple knit clothes. So it was just our times shape us, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a reality, but to acknowledge that in the midst of whatever else is going on in society and however we get carried along by society, we do have choices to make. But we can't really deny the impact of society on us in that particular regard. So in that particular case, as life went on for me, I guess one of my life lessons was the reality of that, of just how impactful we are about our times, how impacted we are about our times, whatever they happen to be. And even then, our final years of preparation for being a priest was long before Pope St. John Paul II got elected Pope. That was when we were ordained. He wasn't elected till 13 years later. So it was still a time of great transition in the church. And so we did have to learn to own our own decisions and to shape our way in a world that seemed to be constantly changing. I'd say another life lesson in that time was, in philosophical terms, a simple way to put it is, there's a difference between the is and the ought. The world ought to be a certain way, but it is this way. And so while we aim for the way that it ought to be, in the meantime, we live in the reality of the way that it is. Some of my thoughts with regard to that is the world, especially in the tumultuous times of the mid-1970s, the world ought to be at peace. There ought to be racial harmony. People ought to get along. Leadership ought to be united. There ought to be no poverty or hunger in the United States. Well, that's what it ought, or the way that it is. There were all those things. There was war, there was racism, there were poor, it was divided. And some of the leaders, including the highest leaders in the land, weren't trusted. Another way to put that is, even in the seminary and in the church, as we continue to experience the way that it ought to be. We ought to have leaders who are pure, leaders who are united, people who are all good examples. Well, the reality is We don't always have that. We have imperfections in leadership, as we do. As I tell you regularly here, you have a very, if you wanted to be in the parish that has a perfect pastor, you're in the wrong one, because you don't have that here. You have somebody who's very imperfect, but has a chance to be redeemed by God's grace. And so it's just the way that the world is, though, that God does a lot of good things through our imperfect situation as we strive to follow God's way. As this feast day today, the Feast of the Annunciation, is all about that. Mary accepting Jesus' will for her. Then that's our goal every day as well. And so I thought it was some challenging times in which to grow up. But one of the things that I've learned out of all that is to treasure the special relationships and the special friendships that come out of that. We can say, there was that song, companions on the journey. That's what that we all are. We're not going through this earthly journey on our own. I think sometimes some of the men were pretty dramatic about how difficult things were for us. I remember one of the phrases that some of them used was, well, the goal we're given as seminarians is to climb this mountain, and the only tools we have is a toothpick and a spoon. And so that was a bit of an exaggeration, a little bit of self-pity, but that can creep into everybody's life. But that's the idea is that we do the best that we can, and we assist one another in getting there. I do want to say a few words about the last year in the seminary. The last year was my deacon year. We still have, as here in this parish, as you know, we're going to have the first young man to be ordained transitional deacon, God willing, in a long time, on May the 24th. So he'll be, if that all goes through, he could be a priest in another year. Well, that year is a very special year of growth, the last year in the seminary. And I, besides completing my studies that year, I had the chance to serve in St. Genevieve, Missouri, which it was the first of several assignments I had when I would get a letter from the bishop telling me where to go, where I had no idea where it was. I still remember, and that was again before the days of Mr. Google and MapQuest, and so the only way to get somewhere was to talk to the person who lived there and have them give you directions. Well, and that was before Interstate 55 was even finished, and so the directions were to take 55 down to Festus and get on 61 and keep going, and when you see the white smoke from the lime kiln on the right-hand side, look to the left and you'll see the church steeple and turn left. That was it. So that's how I got there. So that was a new chapter in my life, I think. And I really loved. I was a city boy. I loved living in the city, working in the city. I loved working in the poor. That program that we ran, we even lived near the housing projects. That was kind of my dream of what to do. Well, the people who assigned me to different places didn't share the exact same dream I did, but they gave me different opportunities to grow, and it turned out really good. I lived with 3 priests there. They were all quite different, but it was a very good sense of hospitality in that house with priests, and a great growth opportunity for me. We could take the kids on bike rides there. There's a big flat open area south of St. Genevieve. The local people call it the Big Field. So we used to take the kids down there, and remember one of the opportunities that they gave me was to go visit a chicken farm. I had never been on a chicken farm before. That was news to me. The owner of the chicken farm, his name, everybody there in St. Gen had a nickname. He was Chicky Roth. And one thing that I thought was very nice when we went to visit this chicken farm was they gave us these plastic bags to put over our feet. And I thought, well, that's really nice. They're trying to protect our feet from all the chicken droppings. Well, they told me it was not to protect our feet. It was to protect the chickens from us bringing in disease and hurting their chickens. And so there were a few lessons to be learned. Another beautiful lesson there was that Well, not a lesson, but opportunity, was there were a lot of lakes in that parish. And word got out that I liked to water ski. I mean, how do you think word got out? And so once the word got out, there was hardly a weekend went by I didn't get invited to go to somebody's lake and water ski. So it was a pretty good year. I did pretty good down there. And my folks ended up retiring to one of those lakes called Lake Forest. So they always said if I wasn't assigned there, never would have got there. So anyway, I would just say so 12 years after I got that calling, there I was going to be ordained a priest, May the 24th, 1975. One of the more profound memories I have still, I think most of the priests would say some of the best parts of the ordination ceremony is when you're lying on the ground and everybody's praying for you, they're singing the Litany of the Saints, and the other is when all the other priests come by and put their hands on your head and you're welcomed into the fraternity. But one of the things personally that I remember was when you have to put your hands between the bishop's hands, and this only takes not even 5 seconds. He puts his hand around your hands and he says, "Do you promise me respect and obedience to me and my successors?" And the only answer you can give is yes, if you want to get ordained. Well, it seems pretty simple that day. When you're 25 years old, you might be a lot more concerned about the promise of celibacy than you are about the obedience. Well, let me tell you, I wouldn't be in this parish if it weren't for the promise of obedience. So it turned out to be a great thing. But when being 25 years old, I had no idea, but it ended up being a great blessing. It's always been, I don't think there was really one assignment I would have chosen. And there were several others that I never even knew where they were until I got assigned there. I would say I was probably not unlike a lot of 25-year-olds. My enthusiasm and my energy outweighed my wisdom to use it. But God gave me chances to develop after that. And I still remember the sermon that the priest gave at my very first Mass. And he goes, "Well, you all know this is an enthusiastic young man. My only concern about him is that he burns the candle at both ends. And I'm not sure how long the candle's going to last." And so 50 years later, it's not burnt out yet. So I'm still glad to be here with you. So thank you very much. So, Larry, you want to say anything? Okay, okay. They're fact checkers. I give them a chance to rebut. John, you like to say anything? All right, thank you. Okay. Eddie, you want to say anything? You can tell a story. This guy's a great storyteller. We're supposed to have a microphone up here. I forgot to get it. Use this.
Do I have to, what do I have to, just hold it? So I want to tell a story that when we were in the seminary, it's more of an adventure. And the backdrop, I have to say, is I think Monsignor mentioned that if you were in the seminary and you decided it wasn't for you, we had a classmate that it was in his senior year and it was after the first semester of senior year, and he decided that it wasn't for him and he couldn't stay. Even though he would have graduated college with all of us, he couldn't do it and he left. And that's sort of how the seminary was. When you were in there, we had a lot of fun, but we were very serious about going towards the priesthood and praying, and we went to Mass every day, and they had lauds in the morning, and then they had Vespers at night. So we were in the chapel a lot, but in the meantime, we had a lot of fun. And people can't realize how much fun we really did have. So this adventure was our first ski trip. And I had worked the summer before at a camp up in Wisconsin for kids, and I knew people up there. So we wanted to go skiing, and we didn't have any money. So I got Msgr, other friends, several friends, and there was 5 of us that decided we were going to go to Wisconsin because I wrote a letter up there and we could stay at the seminary up there. So the lodging would be free, and the skiing really didn't cost much up there. So we could do it very inexpensively. And some of them were really worried about, well, how much money would it take us to do it? And I said, oh, it's not going to cost under $100 or something. Well, I'll be able to go skiing for a week or something. So right before we were going to leave, I called up there to a friend and asked, what's the snow conditions like? And they said, oh, they're terrible. You know, you can come up here, but you're wasting your time. So I talked to Msgr, and we decided we're going to go to Colorado. But we didn't tell one of our classmates who we picked up. He lived in Winsville, and so we're going west, and we picked him up. He had left the seminary, and he was staying in a boarding house, basically, a nice place. And we picked him up, but we didn't tell him that we're going to Colorado. He thought we were going to Wisconsin, and we never did tell him. We're driving west to go to Colorado, and he's starting to maybe pick up on us, and he's going, why aren't we going north? I thought Wisconsin was north. And we tell him, you idiot, don't you know everybody knows that you have to go west so far before you go north? And so we're going west, and we're going west, and finally he realizes that, and we tell him, we're going to Colorado. He goes, stop the car. You hijacked me. You kidnapped me. I don't have enough money to go to Colorado and ski. And so, well, we weren't going to stop the car. We went to Colorado. We had written a letter, and we were going to stay in the seminary in Denver, and we would have free lodging for a week. So we spent the first night there, and then we had a car that didn't have snow tires, we didn't have chains, and when we got up through the passes, we found out that if it snowed, and if we went back down to the seminary, we wouldn't be able to get back up to ski. Well, our goal was to ski, so okay, we're not going to stay in the seminary. But we have no money for lodging or anything. And we were near Winter Park, and we stopped there, and we tried to find maybe some groups of guys that we could talk into letting us pay, we could pay them a few dollars, and we could sleep on the floor. But everybody at Winter Park were going back into Denver, so that didn't work. So there was a group of high school, maybe 50 or so high school kids that were on a couple of buses, and they were staying at the YMCA in Fraser, Colorado. And we decided we'll follow these buses, and if worse comes to worse, we'll sneak in with them and stay in the lobby until at least we won't freeze, and we'll go skiing the next day. So on the way there, we decided that we would look for maybe an abandoned cabin, and the only criteria it had to have was look like it's abandoned and have a chimney, and maybe we could find some firewood and would start that, and we would spend the night there. And we did see one, believe it or not. In the middle, it's probably 2 to 3 feet of snow in the middle of this field, no way to get to it. And we pulled off the nearest road, and then an argument pursued in the car because some of the fellows said, hey, we can't stay in some abandoned cabin or something. Somebody's going to, we'll get arrested or something. It's not going to go right. So I said, well, let me talk to the closest neighbor, and if he gives us permission, we'll do it. So I went up and knocked on this guy's door, talked to him, and he goes, 2 policemen from Wisconsin own it, but they haven't been up here in about 3 years. They normally come in the summertime. He goes, you can stay there. And he goes, in fact, you can park your car. There was a great big aluminum building, garage of some type, and he said, you can park in front of it, but don't block the doors. There are 2 great big doors. And so I pulled the car over there, and I'm looking in my rearview mirror, and I see this gentleman leave his front porch, and he's walking towards the car. And I told everybody in the car, I said, he's going to tell us, you know, take a hike. It's not going to work. But he came up and he said, you guys look like a nice bunch of guys. This is the firehouse. And he goes, I'll turn the heat up for you, and you can stay here. And that's where we stayed. And there was no beds or anything. I mean, it was on top of tables, on top of the fire trucks. And he said if they got a call, we'd have to go with them and help them. So we did spend the whole week there. We had a little Coleman stove. We cooked bacon and eggs in the morning, and food was relatively cheap. But we were so tight on money that we were thinking about skiing at Winter Park, but we found a place called Berthoud Pass that was $1 cheaper on the ski lifts. So that's where we skied. And so Msgr here, in the first day, broke his ski in two. None of us knew how to ski. We took no lessons, we just went up. And on the way down, he broke his wood ski in two, and that he didn't ski for a couple of days at least from that. And so we eventually left, had this whole week up there, and we went back to St. Louis, and the whole trip cost us $57 a piece. And that's just, and nowadays, you know, you could never do anything like that. But it was the adventure and and it was just, I want to tell the story because.
Glad you told that one.
Yeah, there's others, but okay, I'm done.
When Eddie came up, as you can hear, he's a great storyteller. He's Irish. He lives 2 doors from Seamus McDaniel's. That explains a lot. He hosts a great St. Pat's party every year, and when he came up, I wasn't sure what story he was going to tell. That was one of the, and there was even more sidebars on that story, and he left those off. But it just, you gave, I said you guys, my friends could be fact checkers. Well, you just gave evidence of what Archbishop Naumann said, that Ted had fun when he was in college. So yes, I did, and I had a very, very blessed time in the seminary. So Larry, you still sure you're okay? Good, John. So anyway, I want to thank you all for coming. If you want, I think there are some very light refreshments in the gathering space. If you want to stay around and chat, and if you want to privately ask any of my friends to tell you the rest of the story, you're welcome to do that. So let's, the next chapter, I think, is a week from Sunday, I think, and that will be on my first assignment over at Colleville. So we'll close, give you all the blessing. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. May He descend upon you and reign with you now and forever. Amen. God bless you for coming.